I'm with Eric Zurrin, General Director of ResCap. Eric has over 10 years of experience in the investment banking sector. In 2010, he came to Mongolia to participate at the growing industry of financial market. ResCap has become the leading investment bank in the country. Thank you for coming, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, what made you to take the leap to Mongolia in the first place?
The decision to move to Mongolia was highly strategic. I've been in investment banking for the past 10 years, covering the North American, European, and African markets. And the decision to set up a merchant bank in Mongolia was one that came to me with exciting opportunity. The fundamentals of Mongolia are highly compelling. The growth that is experienced here and is expected to continue is very exciting. And from a perspective of being a Western trained expat with investment banking experience, the opportunity that presented to me was too good to pass up.
You run ResCap, which is one of the premier brokerage company in the country. How did this opportunity come to your way?
ResCap is owned 35% by Origo Partners, a London-listed private investment company, 20% by Monis, which is a domestic conglomerate. The opportunity of ResCap came to me through my relationships with Origo's head of mining in Mongolia named Luke Leslie. Luke and I worked together at UBS in London, and on the back of Origo's first investment into Mongolia in 2009, Luke and I worked together to structure a merchant bank, fund it, seed it, and put it into place in the second half of 2010.
Tell me about your relationship with Origo Partners.
Origo is a very strong shareholder of ResCap's and an excellent partner to have in Mongolia. Origo is an investment company, primarily looking at natural resources in the country, but from our perspective, also a very strong supporter of Mongolia and hugely synergistic for ResCap. ResCap and Origo are two completely separate entities, but at the same time work together on various mandates, projects, origination, networking with various Mongolian and foreign investors, and generally cooperate on many of the Mongolian fronts on a day-to-day basis.
ResCap has done some good research and turned up to some good deals. Capital Exploit reader have heard about a few of them. How have you managed to tap into that deal flow?
Investors sometimes forget the importance of being on the ground and having a domestic handle into the best opportunities in country. Through relationships in Mongolia, both with business and political figures, through a team full-time, which is predominantly Mongolian, through having an office on the ground in UB, and through having partnerships like Origo and Monis, we see ourselves as a very strong competitor to sourcing the best deals and cutting the mediocre ones out. And most importantly, making sure the bad ones are never taken to investors.
The MSE is still in its infancy. Do you believe its growth story?
The MSE is going through a transformational stage at the moment with its partnership being the London Stock Exchange. It's been over 20 years since the inauguration of the MSE. Largely over that period, not one single change or very few have actually taken place. As such, the MSE is in dire need of an overhaul. The London Stock Exchange is not only bringing capital, investment, but also know-how, experience, people, full-time through a cooperation agreement with the MSE. On the back of these changes, I believe that the MSE will progress to something improved, to something that is welcoming more to investors with better systems, better securities laws, better infrastructure, improved liquidity, and ultimately as a source for new capital for exciting projects in Mongolia.
If you had to own 3 MSE listed equity, what would they be as of today?
Companies we like, specifically on the Mongolian Stock Exchange, as the top 3 that you've asked, are the ones that are geared to the economic growth of the country. We don't claim to be experts ourselves in understanding the techniques and the specifications of geology, But we do like the growth story in Mongolia, which is very easy and tangible to understand. One of the companies we like is Remicon. You may have heard this company in the past. It is geared to the construction, which is ultimately a derivative of the Mongolian growth, the economic growth in the country. A second company we like and we own through our fund is called Apu. It's a consumer products company. You may have also heard of this one. It's a bottler of spirits, water, and general consumer product. And a third company that we think is very exciting and one to keep an eye on is Eurofer Asia, which will be listed as the first reverse takeover of a Mongolian listed shell, literally in the next few weeks, likely before year end. This is one company that we've been working with for over the past year, has exciting prospects, and is essentially a fire safety distribution company of fire products, maintenance, training, expertise, with a 10-year track record at very modest valuations.
You started a fund called MSC Liquidity Fund. Can you fill us in on this product?
The MSC Liquidity Fund is a very easy, accessible product vehicle for foreign investors and Mongolian investors, but largely geared to foreign investors to tap into Mongolia without ever actually having to come to the country. The MSC Liquidity Fund is largely in response to investors that we've met and come to know over the last 2 to 3 years, who've been asking about exposure to the Mongolian Stock Exchange, who've been asking about exposure to very high yielding term deposits in the commercial banks, both of which we combine in the fund. The MSC Liquidity Fund is a very simple open-ended structure, has monthly subscriptions, quarterly redemptions. It's a modest size, just under $10 million at the moment, but we think it's interesting because we've now had 11 of the 12 past months since inception have been positive returns. We're running at about a 15% annualized rate at the moment on the back of 11 months. And we think there's a number of exciting prospects that we are introducing into the fund. At the moment, the fund is largely still in US dollars, largely because we think the prospects for the Tugrug are very strong fundamentally, but over the short term we see some weakness. And so far we've called that right. The fund is largely exposed to very high yielding term deposits. We've taken a very conservative approach at the moment. And on a bespoke basis, when we see the need and the opportunity to come into private deals that we bring to list on the Mongolian Stock Exchange or some of the existing listed companies on the exchange, that's when we bring the fund into that exposure of listed equities on the Mongolian Stock Exchange. One other point to add, the fund is one of the few ways to get exposure to the Tugrug without actually having to buy the underlying currency.
What's your opinion on private equity in the country?
I think Mongolian private equity investors, or rather investors looking at private equity in Mongolia, should exercise caution when looking at the country. I think private equity for international investors should be reserved to sophisticated, accredited, or well-experienced investors. The reality is due diligence is key in Mongolia. Vetting the integrity of a project, of a management team, is paramount to making sure you get the investment right. And we have seen cases in the past where foreign investors haven't gone through the diligence of vetting projects, both resource and non-resource, and have gotten it wrong. At the same time, I think ongoing management of investments are key, and to do that requires a full-time effort as a private equity investor that you can't forget about when looking at Mongolian opportunities.
Do you trust the average Mongolian company's financial reports?
I think financial reporting and investing obviously go hand in hand, and I think the due diligence around financial reporting is key. Obviously, financial reports prepared by Mongolian auditors is not to the same level as the Big Four, but that doesn't mean that there aren't great opportunities out there. What we've done in the past is we've spent the time, the effort, and we've had the luxury of being on the ground to exercise that due diligence where we didn't completely understand the financials, and have literally built the financials up from the bottom up to better understand the company, the opportunity, and to get greater comfort on the financials that were reported from the Mongolian entity.
What areas do you see as being undervalued, if any? What would you stay away from?
The secondary market trading of exploration and mining licenses has grown too quickly, too fast, and is resulting in, I think, an overpriced area that investors should exercise some caution. It is also best left to the experts, the geologists, the technical individuals who understand that area most appropriately to make investment decisions. I think from an opportunities perspective, small and medium-sized enterprises in Mongolia, including the ones that we are looking at and reversing onto the Mongolian Stock Exchange, are extremely exciting. These are the companies that are geared specifically to the economic growth in country, and if you get them right, can result in very significant returns and very exciting prospects without having to take on exploration risk of mining and exploration licenses.
What's your 12 to 18 month of outlook for the Mongolian Stock Exchange and the currency?
The currency is interesting. The Mongolian tugrug fluctuates on capital flows with very few speculators, if any, that drive the domestic exchange rate. Since the tugrug became free-floating over the past couple of years, it has really been geared to FDI, foreign direct investment. And as FDI accelerates over the summer period, we've seen literally cases of seasonal currency patterns. The downside, obviously, is as FDI may dry up or may soften on the back of political changes, that also impacts the currency. And this is where we think we are post-election at the moment. We also think it will change. The currency is ultimately expected to appreciate significantly. That's largely due to Mongolia shifting sharply to a net export position as Oyu Tolgoi comes into production in 2013. We've heard cases out of the government of the currency moving as high as 500 to the dollar, where it is now 1,400. And you have to remember, this is a very small economy on the back of very large world-class assets exporting commodities, so it's a resource, a commodity currency. We're long-term, medium and long-term optimists on the currency. The Mongolian Stock Exchange, you have to remember, the index is weighted by the top 20 companies, market cap weighted. So the top 5 companies on the Mongolian Stock Exchange contribute significantly to the movements in the overall index. Some of those companies have had appreciating share prices in large amounts over the last few years, and we think those are now cooling, and as a result, I think the index as a whole may not experience the same returns that investors are expecting. That doesn't mean there aren't opportunities to be had on the Mongolian Stock Exchange. We think hard work around reverse listings that we're doing, around picking companies that have far undervalued fundamentals in terms of intrinsic value of real estate, buildings, equipment versus their market caps. Digging down into companies outside of the top 20 are very exciting, despite the index moving up or down, which is really just a function of the larger companies on the stock exchange.
Thank you for speaking with us today, Eric.
Thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you as well.